Casey, you weren't here when the Bengals drafted Shemar Stewart, but your thoughts of the RAS score, because that's really
your cup of tea.
That is my.
That's
bread
why.
and butter
That's
here.
why. I mean, that's why they drafted him. It's because he had a
Correct.
perfect RAS score. It's because he's athletic as hell. Do you think that's going to translate into sacks? It didn't translate into sacks in the college level, but will that translate? Could it translate into sacks in the National Football League?
Yeah, I mean, I also think too. You got to think about his scheme, what he was playing, what he
Correct.
was asked to do. I mean, he was asked to play basically over top of the tackles that he was going up against, sometimes even inside shoulder. And that's just not how edge rushers play in the NFL. They play that wide 9 look where they've got basically a straight path to the quarterback. He was having to do a lot of arching and bending, and he's athletic enough to make enough of a disruption but not finish the play. I think you adjust that to the NFL where you're playing a little bit wider and you're asked to do a little bit more in terms of just being able to get there quicker. I think he's just like the perfect body type for that. I think he's the perfect fit for that sort of ask. And I do think that it's a risk, right? It's always going to be a risk because you don't know if these guys will still have another gear to get to develop. But with what you see athletically, I mean, the sky's the limit in terms of what he can do. So, I mean, I've seen enough to say, like, I understand the vision of you get this guy to be able to just bend a little bit more and teach you a little bit better technique here on your chops and have a better straightforward path to the quarterback. You're not doing too much. I think that he can make a difference. Now, the plan for him is to play inside as well on pass rush snaps, which I don't know how good of a bull rusher he is, but he's certainly fast enough to get past some of these slower guards. And, the strength there is also, like he's tested athletically enough to make you feel comfortable that he can do that.
Yeah.
But we haven't seen him rush a lot from the true inside, like a 3-tech or a 4-eye or whatever. So I'm interested to see how that looks. The rest of the team, like you've got Osai that's done that a little bit.
Murphy, I think that's the plan.
Yeah,
like have that flexibility.
I think a lot of those guys have that flexibility on this team. So he's not gonna just be solely like on 3rd and longs being the inside. I think he's gonna have his opportunities on the outside. But I do think Shemar has the all the tools in the world. It's whether or not he can get those refined enough, and that's going to be all on the coaching staff to be able to make it work. We'll see how that plays out. The coaching staff, I can't remember the guy from Green Bay, but that's the D-line.
Jerry Montgomery.
Yeah, Montgomery. He's going to have a lot to work with. I mean, you've got Miles Murphy. You got Osai another year. You got Shemar Stewart. You got Jenkins.
Brought in Slayton, who was his guy.
Yeah, you got a lot of young guys to work with and mold into your vision. So we'll see how he juggles all that. But I have confidence that he can at least make enough of a difference to be a disruptor.
Yeah, I know the sacks weren't there in college, but this is a Texas A&M defensive line that had 3 picks in the top 2 rounds. And Shemar Turner went right at the end of the 2nd round, and Nick Scorton went right outside of the top 50, picked 51 to the Panthers, and Shemar Stewart led that defensive line in pressures. That does mean something. I also think something that's important to note is Jared Verse, a player a lot of people in Bengals fandom was talking about the Bengals getting last year, ended up going to the Rams, winning Defensive Rookie of the Year. He was one of the most productive rookie edge rushers we've ever seen. He had 4.5 sacks. That's how much how football is changing. He won Defensive Rookie of the Year with 4.5 sacks because we know we can value, the impact an edge rusher can make on the game a little bit deeper than just the sack number. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Shemar Stewart has more sacks this year than he did at Texas A&M.
Yeah,
I think he has 5+ sacks this year, and I think he's a really, really good player for this Bengals defense.
Yeah, the Bengals, you can look at the sack numbers; they were really bad, but the pressures, some of these better pass rushing teams that don't have a lot of sacks have some of the most ungodly amounts of pressures, right? That just make the quarterback uncomfortable, make a move out of the pocket. And there's not very many quarterbacks that, like Mahomes, can just run out of the pocket, throw a ball perfectly accurate down 40 yards down the field. That's just not a lot of quarterbacks in today's world.
You need a specific kind of speed to chase Lamar Jackson down twice a year.
Exactly. And I think adding just more pressure will also help Trey Hendrickson because he
Correct.
had literally no pressure to work
That's something
off
we
of.
talked about on Friday. Is if you get those 40-plus pressures from a guy like Shemar Stewart, maybe he does finish the season 2.5, 3 sacks. But if Trey Hendrickson's able to take a 12.5 sack season to a 15 sack season because of those pressures caused by Shemar Stewart, that won't necessarily be reflected in his stat sheet. But I think that's something that really makes that pick better if Trey is here this year, when Trey is here this year, because I don't think they're moving him after what we saw this weekend.
My whole grade of this draft is solely dependent on Trey Hendrickson being a Cincinnati Bengal.
Yeah.
If he's a Cincinnati Bengal and he's playing every single game next year, potentially another year after that, depending on what they do with him, this draft I think everybody's going to look back at and say this is really, really good. If he does not play, if he wants out, if he does the I'm going to retire thing again, and he doesn't suit up, no, I don't think he'll do that. But if he does do it, I think it's going to be a different sort of draft. I think you're going to look at it maybe a little bit worse than you probably come into it. So that's why I think it's like a C. I think it has an upside of a B plus and there's a downside of a C minus.
All right, off the bench, presented by UDF. Again, we put the poll in the chat. How confident are you in this draft class for your Bengals? What grade would you give it? Right now, 9% of the vote gives them an A. 40% gives them a B. 32% gives the Bengals a C, with 19% going the D and the F route. I think that B and C range is pretty fair.
I think A and F are both crazy.
A and F are like
just crazy picks to vote for if you're grading the
yeah.
Bengals draft. I don't know how you can justify it as an A if 3 out of the top 4 picks were consensus board, almost full round reaches. Even if they are great players, I think it's tough to ignore value to that degree and get an A. You also can't, even if you're the most pessimistic fan, you can't act like Shemar Stewart's an F pick.
No.
He has the potential to be phenomenal. And in the last couple of rounds of the draft, the Bengals drafted guys that'll impact the team in positions of need in week 1. So I think A is just as crazy as F. If you're at B or C, certainly his justification for it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The one criticism I keep coming across the most from just like watching the national draft coverage was, I know we talked about it last week, I was kind of underwhelmed with their free agency period. I know a lot of that, the headlines for that were soaked up by the Jamar Chase T. Higgins contract. But if it was an isolated draft after a good free agency, this draft is really, really good. But because they didn't make a lot of moves, they weren't very aggressive at all in free agency, this draft makes a lot of Bengals fans feel underwhelmed. I think a lot of Bengals fans felt we weren't very aggressive in free agency. They're putting a lot of stock into this draft. Let's go nail it. I think because you didn't add anything, because we did not add anything in free agency, I think that makes this draft feel a little underwhelming. How do you respond to those who view it from that perspective?
Yeah, and I think that is fair. I think that's why, the Bengals don't have the benefit of the doubt for most of the people in this fan base talking about the draft, talking about any kind of acquisitions. We even saw it through free agency. A lot of questions asked about every signing the Bengals made, and it's because we haven't seen this front office execute to a degree that, makes us consistent contenders without people falling into their lap. I mean, I give them more credit than most do, but still at some point you have to look at it and say the success that they've had is with, 1, 5, 33, 37. Like, these are picks where you have great players falling into your lap. So it is tough to justify this front office, taking swings on players, taking, their guys that disagree with the consensus board when we've seen time and time again, not just with the Bengals, but with every team in the NFL, the consensus board knows what they're doing, at least to a degree. Certainly, there's misses in every draft class, but if you're taking a guy 50 or so spots on the consensus, below where he is on the consensus board, then you're taking a reach. And even if he turns out great, you're not getting the best value for your slot. So I think that's the frustration for the Bengals, is they didn't maximize this draft. However, they can still get, 4 or 5 starters out of this draft class. And with the high-end talent we have on this team, with the Joe Burrows, the Jamar Chases, the Logan Wilsons on defense, I think it's enough to make this team a legitimate contender this year if these guys can play to the level they drafted them to play to. And that's not Shemar Stewart being an all-pro player. That's Dylan Fairchild and Jalen Rivers being our starting guards and being better than than Alex Kappa and Cordell Volson were last year. That's Demetrius Knight being our linebacker too and being better than Jermaine Pratt was last year. That's Taj Brooks being the best second back we've had next to Chase Brown since he took over last year. So if those picks below Shemar Stewart can be immediate impact guys, fill into the slots, I think the Bengals did a good enough job to complement their star players and be a legitimate contender this year, which is what we all asked them to do going in.
Yeah.